Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, wherever and whenever you're listening to this. My name is Andy Andreas with Grace Healing, and I have with me Larry again today. Hey, Larry, how are you doing?
Great. Good morning.
Good morning. Welcome, everyone. In our weekly series, we were just talking, Larry and I, what's rising in our heart, and I think we're going to focus today on talking about how to live in the moment. In a broader sense, how do we as humans deal with concepts, ideas, and perceptions? I think that's really the crux of the matter where we sometimes struggle in life. And last week during the meditation, Larry, you pointed out a book, Alchemy by Paul Selig, one of the series that he has written, and it sounded really appealing to me. I got the book and started reading and listening to it, actually. I'd like to start off by reading a small paragraph
Of course.
about it, and that kind of frames our discussion today.
Yes.
And it goes like this. The realization of the divine in any moment claims eternity. The moment you sit in now is the only moment there is. Everything else is an idea. Yesterday, an idea. Tomorrow, an idea. And what yesterday was is also an idea. There is no reality to it except what you claim for it. I remember my son when he was 5 years old, or I remember my wife when we wed. These are ideas. They are not realities, but you suppose they are and consequently attach meaning to them. Tomorrow is the same. It is just an idea. If there were no word tomorrow, if you were not predicating a day upon a sunrise and a sunset, what would the day be except the moment you sit in? This paragraph really made me think quite a bit. And to me, it says it all, that we struggle living in the moment. And why is it? Is it because of all these ideas and conceptions and conditions that we are surrounded with?
Well, like even one of the things that I know that's close to your heart, where you have a marriage ministry in working with people and bringing them together in marriage, like you said, how I knew my wife or my bride or whatever. And the reality is you don't. You have a perceived notion of who they are in the moment you connect with them, but you don't know them. And as life progresses, you discover more and more, many more facets, many more issues, many more things, many more aspects of the person. So you really didn't know them, but you knew you were moving in a direction with them. So if what he's describing in this book, Paul, to be in that moment of recognition is probably one of the most important things you could do. Because if you connect with God in the moment, and you know that God is moving you in a certain direction, you will align yourself with the blessed nature of what God is and not be distracted by the winds of the earth or demands placed upon you by influences or perceived notions of what's coming tomorrow or what happened yesterday. So you would be present in the moment and you would move literally and actually as the living presence of God, which would reveal blessing in your actions.
There's millions of moments.
Yes.
You have different moments than I have. We have one moment right now together here talking,
Yeah.
but you still perceive that moment differently than I do, I'm sure.
Agreed.
So
Yeah.
I think that's a challenge,
And
knowing in
that's
the moment.
where I believe that that's one of the creation statements right there. Yeshua said, two, in the fullness of agreement, and it is done upon this earth. What you just described is two people in a like setting, talking about like concept, but each person has their own perceived notion. And people wonder why the prayers aren't manifesting as they want to, because they honestly aren't spending that meditative awareness, that momentary section upon God first, and becoming two in fullness of agreement, not partial agreement, but fullness of agreement on a certain matter. And it's about developing that spiritual fortitude, that that spiritual practice, like you mentioned at the beginning of the time together in the interview, was helping people to understand living in the moment and the daily practice that we do. And as you know, within Grace Healing, you've been such an amazing instrument in bringing forth all these understandings. I mean, I don't know, what are we up to, like close to 200 episodes or something like that,
close to
that people
300.
could actually tap as a resource. Over these past couple of weeks, I've had a recurring theme from people asking for, what do you do in a daily practice? Well, what do you do throughout your day? What do you do within this situation? And I'm thinking in my heart, well, we've provided like 50 some odd instructions on this, whether it's how does one rise in the morning? Where do they begin their day within God's presence? How do they center upon God in every situation that they encounter? That it is first the gap moment. You and I have discussed this repeatedly about that moment we see something rise in front of us, and are we bringing our perception to it, or are we honestly shedding ourselves and embracing God first for the gap, then the divine response, instead of seeing it and reacting based upon.
You're muted for some reason. Oh, now it's good. I got you back. You were muted for like 5 seconds, but
okay.
Now it's good.
So instead of us just pushing ahead and taking in the perceptions from the past or fears for the future, we become that gap moment of God in that moment. God first, then we become a divine response instead of a spiritual reaction formed by perceptions of the past or a spiritual reaction formed by anxieties of the future. And one of the things that comes to mind is people ask for this type of information. But I would say, well, what exactly are you doing to apply your daily practice moment to moment? It's like I mentioned to you right before the phone call. Is this like somebody standing there in prayer with a shovel under their chin, leaning on it and expecting God to produce holes in the ground? If you are doing the things that are called your personal practice, whether it's waking in the morning and you breathe in, Yahweh, Yeshua, Abun, and you allow yourself a simple 3 breaths or 7 breaths in that awareness of just Yahweh, Yeshua, Abun, Yahweh, Yeshua, Abun, and you've done that for a period of like 40 seconds, 50 seconds, or whatever, and then you're into basic movement within your body. My question is, what are you doing to bring that shovel to actually digging the holes? What are you doing to bring that practice of your morning of intentional awareness, intentional gratitude, blessing to approach your day? What are you doing to develop the spiritual fortitude to employ that in every breath of your day? And that's where I'm seeing the gap in people, is this, yes, they have a wonderful practice. Yes, they have a beautiful application. And then they jump into work and it's, all that stuff is set aside. And it's like, oh, this panic and that fire and that phone's ringing and this person's got to respond to that. And they're not taking the shovel to the project to actually use the proper tool in the moment.
So, and the crux of the matter is that there needs to be an impulse, a motivation, a reason. And if that's missing, then you won't dig that hole with that shovel, right? So
exactly.
maybe we need to break it down and say, okay, so how Larry, how do you, I mean, you have been doing this a long time. For you, it's normal. It becomes second nature, I'm sure. So it does for me, that I choose certain moments in my day where I reflect, where I meditate, where I pray. But for those that have not done that before, how do they get that motivation? Well, yeah, through watching some videos that we do, but you need to be motivated to watch the videos, or you need to be motivated to read a certain text, or whatever moves you to do it. I think that's where the problem is.
Well, in me, it's become, I have one thing of greatest importance in me, and that is God. To me, God is the most important aspect of every perception I own. So when you said, how do you make it like a second nature? I don't. It's my first nature. I was even talking with somebody that was in deep distress yesterday, and we were going through and dealing with a lot of the spiritual ground that the person was in, and in and out of the suicidal thoughts, and we released the spirits of suicide, all the different experiences and stuff. And I was just saying that I don't even pick up a hammer without the intention of God in my building work. I don't even go to the chop saw without the intention first, God. It's not a second nature. I go to it, and there's been times where I'm turning around and all of a sudden I have a designer show up on the job. I have the client show up on the job. Everybody's got 3,700 questions, and I got numbers rattling around in my head. I have to engage in the nature of God's presence, or I'm going to allow for worldly and spiritual distraction to undermine my stewardship over his money, over that client's money. I'm going to undermine the stewardship over efficient use of time to bring him what he's looking for in a honest and integritous way. So in me, I desire God first in my morning, Yahweh, Yeshua, Avun, God first in my movement as I begin to stretch and open my body, but God first within my actions. So it's not a second nature. It's not a tool I bring along. It's an engagement first unto God, so God will reveal to me the proper tool for the use. And then it's a forward thing. So again, I think the most important statement to, like in my perception, to remove from that is the concept of second nature. Let it be one's first nature, and develop the spiritual fortitude to let that be the nature of how you're governed. First nature, God.
It's a shift of perception from second nature, God making God first nature, and then it will flow. But still, you know, to continue with that thought a little bit, I personally have problems implementing a new routine because I forget, you know, so I can't just say from one day to the next, okay, I'm going to make God first nature. It's not going to work for everyone. There needs to be something else. Like, I'm thinking from a practical point of view in life. I could have a journal. I could have an iPhone where I have a reminder that pops up, you know, every 2 hours. God, it says, seek God first, for example. That could be a tool that I could use, right?
Yep.
Maybe that's necessary to do that.
And it may be, because you got to figure that, I mean, in my 60 years, or another person that's in their 28 years old, there's 28 years of programming.
Yeah.
There's 60 years of programming. Thankfully, God by grace moved me to a place when I was in my early 30s to measure God first. It was by grace that it happened. But then I had to develop over the next, 28 years or whatever, up to 60 years, I had to do it on a daily practice. Now, I didn't have the things like apps. I found myself smashing into a wall or banging my head or being confused by a bunch of questions being thrown at me by 6 or 7, 10 people on the job site. And I realized, I don't like this. I don't like this feeling. I don't like this. So I had to go through the boom, 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 banging into it, spiritually, or if you want to describe it that, emotionally, banging into emotional walls to realize, wait a minute, there's got to be a different path here. So what we're trying to help people understand, I believe, within yours and my time here, is the ability to develop this process, the spiritual fortitude, to be God first within our thought process, because we don't like having to bang into the walls. We don't want to bounce off of this one or whatever and trip over people in our lives. It is about developing that practiced awareness. And yes, it's taken me a number of years to move from God as my second nature to God as my first nature, and my life as a second nature. God is my first nature. What unfolds from that is my second nature.